Welcome back, everybody. Today we're looking at our first lesson for Chapter 19. And like I said in the introduction, Chapter 19, we're going to transition away from what was going on in the eastern half of the states and kind of go back to looking at what's going on in the West. If you remember, before and even almost like right up to the time when we started looking at the Civil War, we had been talking about westward expansion and expanding the country to be from sea to shining sea. So today we're going to get back looking at that and looking how it affected some of the people that were moving out there, but more specifically the people that were already there. And so Chapter 19, Section 1, the title is Indian Peoples of the Great Plains. And our essential question for today is, how were different Indian tribes able to develop these very varied cultures and traditions in the Great Plains? So we'll look at some of the different tribes and some of the things that they did to adapt to life in the Great Plains. And our key terms for today, teepee, a travois, corral, and jerky. Like, some of these words may sound familiar, but some of them, like travois, may be a little bit different. But we'll talk about that in the very near future. Now, starting out, I just wanted to point this out. If we look at this map, it shows where many of the major Native American tribes and nations were located around the country, and some of them we've already talked about: the Cherokee, the Seminole. But we'll also talk about the Blackfoot, the Navajo, Apache, Shoshone. You may remember the Sioux. And so see that these are some of the nations that we will talk about today. And another thing I wanted to point out is, if you look up in the northern part of the United States, you see the Blackfoot Nation, and I actually have ancestors that were part of the Blackfoot tribe. So I thought that you might think that was might find that interesting. Native American tribes had lived on the plains of the American West for many, many, many years. Some, like the Arikaras, had lived there for hundreds of years, while others, like the Lakotas, moved to that area in the 1700s. Now, why did they move into the Great Plains? Well, if this map looks familiar, do you remember when we talked about manifest destiny? White Americans believed that it was their destiny to conquer all the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. So as Americans moved west, some Native Americans voluntarily moved further west to stay ahead of them, while some of them, if you remember from this map, this was from you had the Cherokee Trail of Tears that were all a result of the Indian Removal Acts. Some of them moved voluntarily, while some were pushed out of their lands as settlers pushed further and further west. Now, the tribes and the nations that settled in the Great Plains had very rich and varied cultures with different artwork, religions, languages, and the earliest depended mainly on agriculture for food and lived in semi-permanent homes. But with the introduction of horses in the 1600s by the Spanish, no longer would tribes have to rely on agriculture for food. Horses gave mobility to the tribes, they could be used for hunting, and they allowed tribes to follow the various herds of buffalo. And our first video today, we're going to talk about the Comanche and how they ended up acquiring horses from the Spanish, and how that changed their entire culture, and the quote horse culture that followed that.
In the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, the Spanish moved north from their base in Mexico. They established a network of missions and forts in what is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. The purpose of the missions was to secure the territory for Spain and to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. But in 1690, abuse of native populations in New Mexico led to a revolt that temporarily drove out the Spanish. When the Spanish retreated back into Mexico, they left behind much of the livestock they had brought from Europe, including their horses. The horse was about to change Native American life like no other event had ever done. By 1700, all of the tribes of Texas had horses. Most used them as beasts of burden to transport goods and people. But to other tribes, horses became an integral part of life, and a unique new culture emerged centered around the animals. The horse culture. These tribes included the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Pawnee, Kiowa, and a tribe new to Texas, but soon to be closely linked with its history, the Comanche. After 1700, the Comanche had rapidly moved south, perhaps drawn by word of the Spanish horses and the lure of great concentrations of buffalo. By 1750, the Comanche had driven the Apache and the Tonkawa off the Great Plains, creating a vast empire called Comancheria. It covered over 24,000 square miles and included parts of Colorado, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, and western Oklahoma. The horse allowed the Comanche and other tribes to move onto the plains and effectively hunt the vast herds of buffalo and antelope. With buffalo and horses, these Indians had riches equal to any culture in North America. The buffalo provided food, shelter, clothing, tools, rope, bedding, even fuel. The abundant food supplies encouraged a population explosion. And the horse gave them mobility and, for the first time, a way to deal effectively with the Europeans. With the buffalo providing ample food supplies, the horse culture Indians had plenty of time for other activities, particularly warfare and raiding enemies.
Now, if you want to understand the lives of the Plains Indians, you have to understand the dependence on the buffalo. It was all about the buffalo. It was said that a buffalo could be used 52 different ways by a tribe and that nothing was wasted. The hides were used to make clothing and teepees. Teepees are tents that are made by stretching buffalo skins over long poles, and you may have seen one or two in previous lessons or just at any time talking about that. And teepees were great because they could be easily packed up and carried on a travois, and a travois is a sled that was pulled by either a dog or a horse. So their skins were used to make clothing and to make houses, make the teepees, which were the homes. They could be easily packed up. The hooves were boiled down to make glue. The humps on their backs were used to make shields. The bones were used to make tools and weapons. And these are just a few of the uses that the Plains Indians had for the buffalo. Tribes of Plains Indians would pack up their homes and follow the herd of buffalo into valleys and forests during winter and out onto the plains during the spring and summer, where grass was plentiful. Life, culture, and travel all depended on the buffalo. And I want you to take a look at this picture. And as we're going to move around the picture a little bit, how many different uses for the buffalo can you see in this picture? As we look in the foreground, you see a woman stretching out a skin to tan it, to get the hide ready to be used to make clothing for the teepees, which are pictured. What are some of the other things that you see in this picture that show the uses for the buffalo? Before horses, hunters would hunt buffalo by sneaking into the herd, and then they would scare them into a corral, which is another word for an enclosure. So they would scare them into an enclosure or over a cliff, and they would scare them into the corral or over a cliff, and there they would kill the buffalo. So that's how buffalo were hunted before horses. After horses, hunters would ride into a herd and shoot the buffalo with arrows or rifles. And once the buffalo were killed, women would join the hunters in cleaning the buffalo and preparing it for its many uses. We mentioned teepees, shields, and bones. But hides were used for clothing, and the meat was actually the main food source. And in order to keep the meat edible without refrigeration, most of the meat was dried and made into jerky, like is pictured here. But I doubt that the Plains Indians had teriyaki flavor.
The hunter has joined the hunted. He is a decoy in a surround. The decoy charms the herd leader and edges toward the cliff. The herd stares and follows, stares and follows. Suddenly, it is surrounded by secret blinds and chasers. The stampede goes the way of the decoy, over the cliff.
Now, like almost all societies, and there are a few exceptions to this, like most societies, men and women had very specific roles. For the Plains Indians, women were responsible for taking care of the home, and I mean this in both the literal sense and the figurative sense. Literally, they took care of the home. They made the teepees out of buffalo hides, as we mentioned earlier and as we saw in the picture earlier. But they are also responsible for putting up the teepee and then taking it down before moving. So that's in the literal sense. Figuratively, they cared for the children, cooked the meals, and made many of the crafts. And in fact, a woman's skill at making crafts, blankets, baskets, beadwork, a woman's skill at making crafts would determine her level of respect in the village. Now, we've mentioned this, but we already know that men were responsible for hunting, but they were also responsible for protecting the women, the children, and the elders. They would provide military leadership to defend their homes or to try and extend their territories, and military leadership to seek riches or even for revenge. And it was this knowledge of warfare and how to conduct warfare and hunting. It was passed down from generation to generation, and success in warfare generally brought respect from members of one's nation, one's tribe, with bravery and ability both being very highly regarded. And this is a photograph of an actual Sioux war party getting ready to go out and make war with a neighboring tribe. Which brings us to our assignment for today. And now this assignment is going to come in, there's going to be a couple of steps. And the first step is to watch this following video, which is entitled Killing the Buffalo. And once we finish the video, I'll explain the rest of what we have to do for today's assignment.
By forcing Indians west of the Mississippi River, the United States thought that the Indians would be out of its way once and for all. But America was growing rapidly, and it wasn't long before pioneers began moving west across Indian land, heading for California and Oregon. They were followed by miners who trespassed on sacred Indian land in violation of treaties in search of gold and silver. They were followed by the railroads, which cut through the heart of Indian country and interfered with the migration of the buffalo, the Plains Indians' main source of food. What's worse, the railroads hired professional hunters to kill buffalo to provide food for the railroad workers, reducing the number available to Indians. Buffalo were also killed for their hides. After the skins were stripped from the animals, the carcasses were left to rot. Realizing the devastating effect the loss of the buffalo would have on Indians, the government encouraged people to kill as many buffalo as possible.
The government actually provided free guns and free ammunition to buffalo hunters, and they also provided revenue to purchase the buffalo skins, so that the incentive was there for people to go out and do that. And you had people that would go out and kill hundreds and thousands of them as an economic opportunity for themselves. And then there was also the train and the railroad system was just being put through this part of the country, and so you had a lot of people that would just come as tourists, and they would bring their rifles, and they allowed them to just shoot the buffalo from the train as they went by, just the way that I guess you would shoot at tin cans today.
Buffalo hunting by train was a favorite pastime of wealthy sportsmen who would ride out west in luxurious railroad cars and shoot countless buffalo from the safety of the slow-moving trains. Once numbering 60 million, the buffalo population was reduced to 1,000.
All right, so now that we're finished with the video, it's time to talk about what you have to produce. All right, now I want you to use what you've learned in this section and in the textbook on pages 544 to 546, as well as the video that we just got done watching, to write a letter that describes the following details. First, how did Plains Indians depend on buffalo hunting for their culture? So I want you to explain that in your letter. That will be worth 5 points. And then next, how did buffalo hunting affect the lives of women and men? What did they do? Now, and this last part, from the video, how do you think the railroads and for-profit hunters would affect the Plains Indians in the future? There'll be 5 points for answering each of these questions in your letter. Now, in your letter, I want you are to take the position of a person that has been sent by the railroad companies to study the Plains Indians. And your letter should contain any observations you have made about the people and about their way of life, but focus specifically on the effect of buffalo hunting and how railroads and for-profit hunters would affect Plains Indians in the future. And this will be worth a total of 15 points. So I want clear explanations for each of these 3 points. How did Plains Indians depend on buffalo hunting for their culture? How did buffalo hunting affect the lives of women and men? And how do you think, as a reporter, that railroads and for-profit hunters could possibly affect the Plains Indians in the future? Now, this will be worth 15 points. And if you have any questions on what you need to write, or if you just need some ideas of what to say, please let me know. Otherwise, good luck and have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to reading your letter.